Good morning. My name is Jeremy Conaway, and I'm the Strategic Architect for the Houston Association of Realtors. And it's my pleasure to be hosting and presenting this webinar for the next 60 minutes. We've designed this program primarily for brokers and managers, and I appreciate all of you being here for a couple of reasons. One is this is the program that nobody really wants to talk about, so your participation is especially appreciated. We're going to be talking about what has happened in this industry from 100,000 feet over the past 3 years and what's going to be happening to it. And so lots of folks don't want to know that, and the fact that you're willing to listen up is really a good thing. So in the spirit of this week's World Series in Houston here, this is a post-game report. We're going to be talking about things that have happened. And we have, over the past 3 years, the American residential real estate industry has been going through a classic disruptive process. We say classic in the sense that the majority of industries that comprise the American economy have either gone through a disruptive process or are currently engaging in such a process. We're pretty much involved in this, working with other clients. I recently completed a study of the disruptive processes of 7 other industries because we wanted to assure our folks in the real estate industry that this was not about them, that everybody in the American economy is going through this experience. Over the past several months, we've been monitoring and tracking the impacts and influence of the disruption in our industry, and more to the point, the effects that they're having on the day-to-day operations. So we're concerned about the what impact has this disruptive process had on the industry, what opportunities have been created, because despite the fact that much of this is going to sound negative, the reality here, the sort of bottom line here, is that disruptions opens up an industry and creates all kinds of new opportunities, and that's a positive side. We're also going to be looking at what strategies and tactics brokers should engage to succeed in this new environment. So why are we making this presentation? Well, one, we're brokerage fans. Let me tell you, you are the wind under our wings. You're the reason why we go to work every day. We love what you do. We love watching you do it. We think you're exciting people. And you've given us an opportunity over the past several years to learn things about what's happening in this industry and the directions it's going in, and now we want to share this with you. And most importantly, we want you to have a glorious future, but what we realize is that we're coming up to an intersection which you're going to have to turn right or turn left, and we really want you to make the right turn, which is what a lot of this is about today. So what is it that we know for sure? Well, first of all, the industry is now disrupted. We're no longer talking about we're going through it. We've been through it, and there's no going back. Whether or not you've been in this industry for 3 weeks or 30 years, what you do is now substantially different than what you did 36 months ago. You may not have noticed it yet, but you're in a whole different world. And the thing about disruption is it doesn't ask for permission. It just assumes that you'll either adapt to the process or there are consequences. But in any way, shape, or form, there's no going back. As you look across the industry, we work with all kinds of entities in the industry. There are various entities and players that are in different stages of reaction, response, and unfortunately, denial. And one of the things we'll be talking about as we move forward. In terms of time, we've been in this process now for at least 3 years. Some people would say 4 or 5 years, but we think 36 months. And it's our sense that for brokers who want to operate in this new era, in this new environment, it would really be good if they had if they were implementing responsive business plans in the next 120 days, which is next spring into next March. After that, there's going to be even more catch-up ball, and it'll be even more difficult because the pace of change is moving so quickly. So that's it. The other thing that we know, having studied 7 other industries, as well as watching what's happening in our industry, is that a surprising number of brokers and brokerages will make conscious decisions not to survive the new environment. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but we found that in every industry we've studied is that an incredible number of people just simply say, we don't believe this is going to happen, we're not going to play, And for most of those, the consequences are quite dire. This is a game that you're going to have to play, or a game that if you decide not to play, you might make some other decisions involved in it, but it's here. So as a parallel, as we worked through our research over the last several months, we observed another industry, another real estate player who was doing some similar research. And one of the things that they created was this tool called a market analysis matrix. And what you're seeing on the screen are 20 different conditions, if you will, or 20 different things that ought to be happening if the traditional real estate market sector is going to be able to play in this new environment. These 20 things are going to have to be there. And as we work through our conversation over the next hour, we're going to sort of reach up and we're going to cross out all the ones that appear not to be happening. And at the end, we'll show you this again and show you what's good and what's bad. But it's just a parallel way to measure what's happening in the industry. So as we move forward, the first element that we're going to take a look at is the consumer. Now, as a starting point, it's important to recognize that the consumer, whether we believe it or not, and for people who've been in the industry for a long time and are the feeling that the agent is the center of the transaction, that condition does not exist anymore. Consumers are now in charge of the transaction. And many of today's real estate consumers, speaking through various other surveys and studies and research projects, have made it clear that they're suspicious and not particularly trusting of the traditional real estate services, nor the traditional real estate industry consumer experience. The contemporary consumer has a higher level of sense of that. So this is a consumer who, one, is demanding levels of transparency, honesty, and attention to detail, not often provided by the traditional transaction. Perhaps most important about this is a consumer who, for the first time in history, will demand to have all the necessary information and service options, and will demand to be in control of the transaction. Now, many of you are going, oh yeah, that'll be the day. Well, remember, it's perception is everything, and to this modern-day consumer, having control and having the information is something they have to feel that they have that, whether they do or not. That's what makes for a successful transaction. So the primary struggle within this new industry space, this new environment, is around the question of who will provide the consumer with the information necessary to facilitate their control. So this slide you're seeing now is the first of 14 slides in which we're going to ask you the question: does your brokerage have a plan that addresses the new consumer? That would be yes or no. And we're going to do that 14 times. And at the end of this, then we're going to ask you what your score is. And based on your score, we'll kind of be able to answer the question around whether you're going to be able to be a competitor in this in this new environment. The second thing we look at is that since data and information about the property, the neighborhood, the community, the taxes, virtually every imaginable subject. Since that's the central theme of this and what people are looking for, the consumers are looking for, you can imagine that there's a significant number of entities who have taken commanding positions with respect to providing the information with a wide range of market information and strategic advice and counsel. That's where you want to be. You want to be where the consumers go to get information. That's the more important thing that they see when you look at the studies that have been done. The number one thing they want to know is what's going on. The number two thing then is to approach a purchase or sale in an intelligent fashion. So this is a key area in which we believe your brokerage can make a difference. This is where HR is working hard to be your strategic partner with both the member brokerages and agents. And so this is one of those things when you get down at the end of this and you say, well, geez, I don't have $1 billion and I don't have 400 staff people, whatever it is, here's a place where you can make a space and make a difference. And it's something that's really important. So this takes us back again now. Does your brokerage have a plan that addresses informational standards and how you provide customers and clients with the information they need or demand for a successful transaction? Again, you do, you don't. This is a to-do list that's important for you. Now, The next thing we want to talk about is the MLS. There's an interesting thing going on with the MLS. As you know, the MLS has sort of been one of the most stable places in the industry for the last 50 or 60 years, and that status is beginning to change. There's a number of industry forces, including the MLSs themselves, that are attacking the dependability and stability of the MLS. And we're hearing that from the growing practice of what's called coming soon and other off-MLS practices that are also contributing to the trend. So where there was once an absolute 100% participation in the MLS, what we're beginning to see in various markets across the country and here in Houston are brokerages who are using coming soon or off MLS techniques to say, well, let's just leave it off the MLS for a while. That could be a week, 2 weeks, whatever the brokerage policy is. Let's see if we can sell it without it being on the MLS. And so as a result of these practices in various markets across the country, the MLS that has long been a stabilizing influence is now considered to be on the endangered species list. If you're into this sort of thing, you'll have read and studied NAR's proposed policy statement 8-0, which creates a solution which they believe will solve this problem. It is so what's happening here, we have this conflict going. So organized real estate is saying you've got to put the thing in the, you got to put your listing on the MLS. You have to do it now by this period of time, and this is how it's going to work. Okay, so now the next slide shows where the conflict is. So the NAR comes up with the policy. One of the biggest MLSs actually introduces a rule reflecting that policy. And what's the response of the new big brokers? They're saying, stop treating us like children. These are our leads, our listings, and we will deal with them as we want to deal with them. And in November, when everybody goes to San Francisco, that's one of the debates that's going to occur. So if, in fact, organized real estate passes the Section 8 piece, then many of these new brokerages who are using alternative practices are going to have a simple option. Some of them may decide to not be realtors anymore. Some of them may decide not to use the MLS altogether. And in any way, shape, or form, that is going to be a conflicting situation, and it going to cause some problems. So again, we go back to the, right, wrong, indifferent, whatever, does your brokerage have a plan to address the current MLS crisis? Are you talking to your representatives in organized real estate about what you want them to do? Because this is something that you better know where this is going, and you better be on top of this, because it could make a huge difference in your practice if significant numbers of companies were to shift to other kinds of services instead of the traditional MLS. The next question we're taking a look at is agent competency. This is something that's been a question we haven't talked about for a long time. We've had this raise the bar movement, and talking about the fact that we have too many agents whose competency we believe is not adequate, and the whole issue. Well, what's happening now is that these issues are now being brought up by consumers and other entities. So the subject and the discussion and the dialogue around agent competency and what it means is expanding. So many of the industry's long-standing doctrines of compensation and cooperation are no longer being followed. People are saying, I don't want to share my listings, I don't want to share my information with folks who aren't competent, so I'm not going to do that. Many of the new brokerage business models are following different rules for practice and competition. So one thought that's going around is that the idea that you get what you pay for didn't necessarily work out for real estate consumers. If they picked the wrong person, then they probably didn't get what they bargained for. So today's consumer is no longer assuming agent competency. In fact, quite the opposite. Today's consumer is closely monitoring their experience for value. And that's really the issue here, is one of value. In a traditional environment, you go back for a long time and it was your brother or your father-in-law or somebody in the family, and you simply, by virtue of loyalty, had to assume say we're competent. Not so much anymore. Today's consumer wants to know that there is a value proposition. They want to see it in writing, and they want to be able to follow it to make sure you're delivering on it. So in the new environment, consumers are no longer assuming brokerage and agent value propositions. Rather, value must be clearly articulated and demonstrated. Agents and brokerages both must use value propositions and service standards if they expect to differentiate themselves from the competitor, and if they wish to score better with today's consumer than much of the other industry is. So that takes us to the ideas of compensation. Several of the new brokerage business models are offering new compensation and commission plans, a whole different variety than offered by the traditional brokerage. The representatives of all brokerages must understand and be conversational about all the fee and commission arrangements that are being offered in their marketplace, and they must be prepared to compare them with what the brokerage is offering. So this is not to suggest you have to like what your competitors are doing, but you need to be able to have a discussion with your client as to why your commission program, your fees, are a better arrangement and more suitable to their situation than anyone else's. So to suggest, well, I don't know anything about that, to today's consumer is to say, well, I guess you don't know much about what's going on in your industry. So you have to know what everybody's offering, study these things, and be able to differentiate your brokerage's particular program against these other ones. So it's likely, when you see where this is going to go, that the ultimate solution to this particular dilemma is probably going to be found in the design, development, and implementation of various standards, so that in the end, consumers can measure all of those against the middle, if you will. So go back to the central issue. Does your brokerage have a plan that addresses the subject of agent competency, value propositions, and compensation moving forward? I mean, have you talked about it? Where do you want to be in this world? Do you want to stay with where you are? Do you want to change it? If you're going to stay where you are, have you evolved a way of explaining your program to your consumer and to your clients in a satisfactory fashion, so they feel comfortable moving forward that you're where they ought to be? That's something new that you'll have to think about doing. So this takes us back to one of our central themes here, and that is virtually every industry in the economy has been disrupted. Now, your industry was disrupted starting in 2017, 2018, and it's sort of winding up disruption here in 2019. Now, what that means is it is essentially a whole new industry, and it's developing new programs, products, and services that meet this new environment. Now, when you get angry about this and said, well, who ordered up disruption? Well, nobody ordered up. Disruption is not something you ask for. Disruption is something that occurs because the environment of the traditional industry simply changed. And we'll look at whether it's technology, whether it's the consumer, whether it's venture capital, whatever it is. A number of factors have combined to create the disruption, or to create the new industry or the new industry environment that you're now working in. So what's important is to realize, again, it's not something you can turn around. It's not something, it doesn't go backwards, but it is something that you can adapt to, and you have to understand what has changed, and then understand what position you might want to take as it moves forward. So if you elect to continue your business efforts in the residential real estate industry, you'll want to either consider incorporating some of these new procedures and competitive practices, or in the alternative, creating and innovating your own. So what's the upside of a disruption is that all the rules are changing, all the procedures are changing. So you, as well as anyone else, if you have great experience or no experience at all, could conceivably come up with the best solution. And that's one of the opportunities that you're looking for. And so again, does your brokerage have a plan that addresses how it will deal with the new industry and market environment? Are you discussing it? Are you seeing how it's impacting your business? If you're from Houston, it is amazing the changes which have occurred even since last November. I mean, the last 12 months, you can list out all the things that have changed. So you want to be sure that you're aware of these changes and try hard. And again, I understand this is upsetting. I understand it's difficult, but you're going to have to learn to live with this new environment. And I think you'll find that once you accept the fact that disruption has occurred, and that there is a whole new freedom to do things in a better way, that your brokerage can really come up to this. All right, another key issue. One of the key players in both the industry's disruption and post-disruption periods are a whole new generation of venture capitalists. Now, venture capitalist is what you do when you can't go to a bank and get a loan. You go to a venture capitalist who undertakes a higher level of risk and uncertainty in exchange for a higher level of interest in return on their investment. Now, the traditional venture capitalists was just interested in loaning out money, getting that money back with their return on investment. But there's a whole new world of venture capitalists out there. And so what's happening is that the new venture capitalist isn't looking to make a loan. They're looking to have an equity interest. So when they come into an industry, what they say is, okay, we're going to invest this money. It'll be carried as equity capital on your books, but we want you to do a couple of things. What we want you to do is disrupt your traditional industry. We're going to loan you the money because you're going to go out and make everybody's life miserable. And when the smoke is cleared, we hope that the business model that you've created will be the one that's going to take the industry over, and that's what's going to provide them with the return on investment that they're looking for. Now, the number that we're looking at right now in the last 12 months is some $1.74 billion has been invested in this industry by this new generation, or this new type of venture capitalist. Now, it's easy to say $1.74 billion, but the amount of money that is in this industry is unimaginable. I mean, it is 5 or 6 times what has ever been invested in this industry in any given 12-month period. And what has happened is that it's sort of like it's your house, you win the lottery, and suddenly there's all this money, and what do? You begin to change everything, whether it's a new house, a new car, dance lessons, or a great vacation, and there's no difference in this industry. With this kind of money being made available to various brokerages and different entities, they're making those changes. And remember, they're motivated by the fact that they were told to go out and disrupt what's been going on. So you're already seeing the impact of these investments making a difference. Industry entities are now supporting historic values. Consider the fact that Compass currently has a valuation of $6.4 billion, which is more than the value of all the traditional brokerages put together. Redfin has a valuation of $1.42 billion. Open Door has a valuation of $10 billion. EXP is now worth $727 million. Douglas Elliman recently arrived here in Houston, has a value of $1.8 billion. These are stunning numbers. The level of power this amounts to in terms of disruption, innovation, and creation is beyond our wildest imaginations. And you're beginning to see some of these companies in the Houston marketplace, and the amount of money they're spending in marketing and advertising and all these kinds of things. That's what disruption. It's a live case of disruption. And for many folks, that's intimidating. Now, just a word about that. You know, if you know this industry, if you've been in this industry, don't worry about how much money someone else is spending. Be sure that you're using every ounce of the intuitive knowledge you have about the marketplace you're working in, because a lot of their money is being spent duplicating what you already have. So don't be intimidated by that. Just be inspired by that. And so that takes us to the question: does your brokerage have a plan that addresses how to deal with your response to the introduction of new product and productivity and management technologies? And it's where are you going that you would need money for? Do you really need money to be great in your own marketplace, or do you really need to wake up in the morning and feel really good about it? That's sort of I guess where we're going with that. Let's talk about technology. Again, amazing. In the first half of 2019, the industry has spent $12.9 billion in the development of what's called prop tech, which is the cool person's term for real estate related technology. Now that's more than in 2017 and 2018 put together. So what's happening is lots of people are out there are spending incredible amounts of money to develop technology. And then you say to yourself, well, I don't need their stinking technology. What do I care how much money they're spending? Well, the point is it's not done in isolation. They create things, they have to sell them. That's how they're going to get their money back. And before you know it, everybody in town except you has this, this, or this, and your customers start asking you, well, do you have this technology? Do you offer this service? Do you have this product? And you're saying, well, no, we don't, believe in that? We don't do that? But you need to be prepared to respond to what's going to happen. But recognize that you didn't ask for this. You didn't ask for this technology. You didn't ask for them to spend $12.9 billion. But they did. And when they did that, they forever changed the reality of the world that you work in. And so the question goes, and what this does is it changes what's happening in your world. And so you got to deal with it. For many of us who just want it to go away, just let me do what I've been doing for 30 years. Leave me alone. Stop it. Sorry, not an option. You're going to have to respond in some fashion to what's happening in this new industry space. So again, does your brokerage have a plan that addresses how to deal with your response to the introduction of new productivity and management technologies? Are you interested? Are you tracking some of these to see if you'd be interested? But you can't just ignore it because that's sort of a short-term gain. The next thing we're taking a look at is the traditional rules of competition. If you've been in the industry a long time, we sort of use the word competition with a twinkle in our eye because there really hasn't been true competition as other industries have seen it. Brokers and agents don't get up in the morning and say, well, I'm going to go out and kill these agents or those agents, and we're going to show them who's who. Cooperation and collaboration has been a much stronger force in the industry. But in this new space, these traditional rules of competition are going through a significant change. What you're now going to see is people who do get up in the morning and who are committed to changing things and making things different. And the cumulative of all this additional competition and the creation of super competitors. And it was an interesting, yesterday we had a program here at the association that had 4 national experts came in to talk about iBuying. And it was interesting to watch because 3 of these folks were just sort of the traditionalists talking about isn't this good and this good. The 4th person was a competitor, and you could see this was a person who was making almost militant points about what was going on because that's the world they live in now. It's not about how we get along, it's how we can be more and more competitive. And so again, you go back, does your brokerage have a plan that will address how it's going to redesign, engineer, or at least review how is it competitive? What makes you competitive? Are you competitive? And are you going to be competitive in the new industry and market environment? And if you're not, do you think you can continue to exist without being competitive? So all we're saying is on this scorecard, you got to have a plan. Now, these things, this idea of planning, we're not talking about going out and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're talking about sitting around talking about what makes us competitive and how could we be more competitive and could we work closer together as a team to be more competitive. So that's sort of the world in which we have to live. Now the next one is interesting. It commonly elicits a denial when we have this conversation. So a key element in this new industry environment is the reduction and or elimination of age-old consumer pain points that grows out of customer service processes and technologies. Now, what's happening is that we did this. Every industry out there has consumer pain points that they simply say, well, that's the way we do it. I'm sorry, if you don't like it, go somewhere else, but this is what we do. And taken as a whole, consumerism sort of reached a low point over the last 5 or 6 years, with almost every industry having some way to make people's lives miserable. But what they did by doing that is they opened the door for disruption. And so what's happening is these new brokerage business models that are coming into the business are committed to reducing and or eliminating consumer pain points. And so the question is, do you know what the pain points are? And there's lots of articles been written about what is it that consumers don't like about the traditional real estate transaction. And so it's easy to have a list in front of you, and it follows that if you sit down with your comrades, your associates in your brokerage and say, well, how many of these are we guilty of? You're going to find you're probably guilty of all of them, because that's what the traditional practice entailed. And it's the way we worked. So that's on the front burner now, the whole concept of consumer pain points and what you're going to do about them. Now, a number of the new companies, a number of the new programs are committed to reducing that, and probably one of the most significant processes that purports to reduce consumer pain points is called iBuying. And the iBuying right now is probably the hottest subject in the industry. It's a relatively new thing. It's been around at the most for 30 months now, really, and it's been changing almost every month. And what you're seeing is that significant numbers of brokerages and franchises and other entities in the industry are putting together iBuyer programs. And I think you could say that at this moment in time, if you looked at the whole area of iBuying, it's really almost impossible to define what it is. It's just, it's a different way, but what it really involves, the I probably stands for institutional. Some people say it's instant, but the most common and probably the most saleable feature of iBuying is the fact that your home is going to be purchased by an institution. Now, this, again, the venture capital folks are crazy over this. They've invested, again, a couple of $1 billion in making money available to have companies like the ones you see listed here participate in buying your home. And what they do with those homes, whether they resell them, whether they put them in investment pools, whether they make them rentals, is a whole issue that we're dealing with, not just as an industry, but also as a culture and as a society. It's a big deal, this iBuying stuff, but its immediacy of it is it's offered to consumers. Its primary attraction is it helps them it helps them get away from lots of the pain points that agents and brokers are setting up, staging and repairing the property, dealing with sellers, waiting for sellers to close on funding, all kinds of things that you don't have to worry about. Now, does it cost more money? Yes, but the evidence so far is that consumers are willing to pay a reasonable premium to be free of all of the hassles of the traditional real estate transaction. That's all you need to know, is they're willing to pay the money. No matter what they tell you when they go to buy a house that they don't have another dime, they're demonstrating the fact they're willing to take money out of their equity to do this. And so moving forward, iBuying is more and more into the marketplace. Much is unknown about its exact costs and procedures, but why is it there? The reason it came on board is the industry's refusal to recognize and address well-known and sponsored consumer pain points. Just that's it. So that's the whole reason. Now, that takes us then to the subject of your brokerage and its profitability. The fact is that for a long list of reasons, the traditional brokerage is having a more and more difficult sustaining itself. I'm trying to think of a nice way to say this. Brokerage profits are hovering at historically low levels. Broker sales and transactions are the same thing. And these circumstances are probably going to continue for the next 3 or 4 years, simply because there's no remedy. No one has come up with a way to make this work, or at least nobody's adopting those things that have been suggested. So you have to worry about that. But what does that mean when you have an industry full of brokerages who are having a hard time sustaining their business model? It's going to be somewhere. It's going to have something. So again, does your brokerage have a plan that addresses how it will rise to the occasion of reducing consumer pain points and how it will respond to or interact with the iBuying movement? And it can't just be to deny the iBuying movement. What we're seeing is agents are out there saying, well, you don't want to do that. You know, that's nonsense and it's a bad deal. You're talking to the consumer of 1941, not the consumer of 2019. If your brokerage is going to have a position vis-a-vis the iBuyer movement, it's either to participate in it or at least to be able to differentiate yourself by being able to explain to consumers why your program is competitive with the iBuying program. But to say, well, you just don't want to deal with that because that's a bad thing, not going to work for today's consumers. Okay, another interesting issue, also a bit sensitive, is what's called agent centricity. So one of the primary reasons that the industry is so vulnerable to the forces of disruption is its traditional agent-centric environment. What does that mean? It means that brokers have for years made decisions based on what the agent wanted rather than the consumer, what the agent thought was best as opposed to what the marketplace felt was best. That world now is not that way. It is not the agent who is able to set the agenda relative to the consumer or the marketplace. And so what you're seeing now is that brokerages simply can't survive in an atmosphere with high commission splits, evaporating margins, and depleted profits. And what you're seeing is a new industry environment emerging based on the values and business philosophies of customer focus, high-tech productivity, and brokerage profitability. So there's a collision there. There's no nice way to get around that, but every agent and every broker is going to have to come to the conclusion that unless brokerages as a business are profitable, then the traditional brokerage will cease to exist and their position will be taken over by some of the new models, which, by the way, are not agent-centric, and it's not the same arrangement. You need to be aware of these types of things as you work your way through that. So does your brokerage have a plan that addresses how to deal with, respond, and overcome the financial and management challenges of customer focus, high-tech productivity, and broker profitability? Where are we on that? So that's something I forgot to mention, by the way, despite the fact that my able producer mentioned it 14 times to me. Write down your questions, and at the end, we'll take some questions here the last few minutes of this time. So if you want to ask specific questions, I apologize for not mentioning that. Okay, so another interesting thing that's happening, and that is another quiet player for the last 50 years has been the title, settlement, and mortgage industries, all of which have had their own consumer pain points that they took great pride in. And what's happening is that they are now being disrupted. There are now new competitors in the title, settlement, and mortgage field who are delivering a much more acceptable, positive, satisfying consumer experience. And so what we discover is that, again, these three industries, title, settlement, and mortgage, have discovered that the delaying strategies that they've employed and the pain points that they've forced on consumers to endure are no longer acceptable. And it's sort of, what do you mean the pain points? Well, what's interesting is, why does it take 45 days to close on a mortgage? And what we have discovered, or what they've discovered, is what's called the first morning certainty. And that is that you should be able to know within 4 hours whether or not you're going to get the mortgage or not. Because it's all a matter of putting in a computer, pulling down the numbers. They know everything there is to know about the lender, the lender's financial history, about the property, the neighborhood, the community, the taxes, and that should take about 4 hours. They're saying, well, why the heck does it take 44? Because that's how they wanted to do it. That's the traditional consumer pain point. So what's happening is now that these industries are being disrupted with new competitors who are using technology and enlightened management to convert these traditions like the 45-day mortgage and the 3-week closing delay into immediate consumer-centric and responsive experiences. the impact of disruption on these industries will be even greater than the one that's in your industry. Again, for those of you who are thinking this is something that's happening to you, no, it's happening to everybody you know, and some of the situations are even worse. So the question again, is your broker, are you tracking what's happening, and do you realize now that there are mortgage, title, and settlement companies who have new processes that are much more positive for your consumer? And do you have a plan through which you will adopt, integrate, and incorporate the new transactional standards being developed by these industries? You can't wait until you start losing people and say, well, they don't come here anymore because they like this. Find out who's doing what they like, and get engaged in that as soon as you can. That's how you take on the disruptive process. Interesting stuff here. Okay, so what we talked about the MLS and some of the problems involved in this. So our industry is currently facing a significant number of regulatory investigations and lawsuits centered around legal issues that are critical to the traditional practice. In the Morrow case, Morrow versus the National Association of Realtors, home sellers are claiming that some or all of NAR's current policies regarding the use of blanket non-negotiable buyer-side commission fees for properties offered on sale in the MLS are a violation of antitrust. Some of you have been in the business for a while, maybe remember back in 2008, some of these issues came to the top, and NAR and the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission were able to reach a consent judgment where they agreed on this. Well, what's happening now is that many players, including private law firms and the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission, believe that it's out of control again, and so now they're taking action to fix this. And what you're being told in many cases, it's no big deal, it'll be fine, it'll go away. I assure you that if you take some time to study what's happening here, you'll discover that it's not okay, that it's very serious, and that over time it could have the biggest single impact on the industry of all the things that we've been talking about. Now, on the regulatory side, these attacks are being coordinated between the Justice Department and the Federal Trade Commission. On the civil side, the attack is being coordinated by some of the most powerful law firms in the country, including those who have won suits against Big Tobacco and such giants as Buyer AG for its Roundup litigation. So these are the big-time law firms. Now, what does that tell you? It tells you this is not a nuisance suit. These are organizations that are used to billion-dollar judgments, and they're willing to spend the next 18 to 24 months prosecuting these cases for those kinds of fees, those kinds of rewards. And just when we thought, well, no big deal, a couple of weeks ago, the Department of Justice filed a document called a Statement of Interest. And even though they're not parties to these civil suits, they can file one of these documents which essentially says, we have taken notice of one party's position vis-a-vis, in this case, the 2008 consent judgment. We've looked that over, and we've looked over what organized real estate is saying it means to them, and we don't agree. And that's a big deal. I mean, at the very least, it's worth $20 million in legal fees to figure out who's right and who's wrong. But you need to be following what's happening here. These are very important. These are very important activities. Another similar thing is what went on in California. Several months ago, the California Supreme Court opined that people like real estate agents should be employees. Uber drivers were in that. All kinds of people who are in a kind of a gig situation. And so everybody thought, all right, well, that's not good. It's California, which has a certain level of respect around the judicial circles. And then about 2 months ago, the California legislature passed a law which said by law that real estate agents, that gig workers are employees. Now, in California, the association came to the forefront and was able to get real estate agents exempted from that. But what you need to recognize that across the country, this issue is coming up. And it just, again, it's just one more notification to you that in a disrupted industry, nothing is sacred. All kinds of things are being brought up and discussed, and will be uncertain moving forward. And these are serious matters, and they pose a serious threat. This is something that you need to be aware of, and awareness is the first step of adoption into a new world. So does your brokerage have a plan that addresses how it will monitor, respond, and react to the regulatory matters and litigation threats discussed above? Are you aware of them? Are you aware of what's happening in your state? Are you aware of what positions people are staying? In terms of the lawsuits, are you tracking that so you can understand before something happens? You know, what's the deal with that? That's what's important here. Keeping your eyes open and knowing what's going on. Now, why all the interest? Okay, so well, the biggest point being, you'd say, well, with all these hassles, why would anybody want to be in this industry? The important thing here for you to know, over the past 2 years, some of the brightest and most sophisticated venture capitalists in the world have invested billions of dollars into your industry, guided by one central theme. There is every reason to believe that these new business models will emerge from this process and will be among the most profitable and productive in the American economy. In 2020, some experts predict that the industry will generate over $80 billion in real estate commissions. These same experts suggest within the next few years, under the system of the new environment, the number will substantially increase. So despite how this may sound not positive, the positive side to this is that the traditional real estate system has been leaving incredible amounts of money on the table because that wasn't their focus. And what you're seeing now is that that's going to change, and much more money is going to be made. That's why all these people are spending all this money to disrupt your industry. That's why you want to get on top of this and ride the same wave of success. So we go back to this document that we shared with you. So if you take a look at these 20 things, this is what ought to be happening. Then let's spin over to this one. This shows you, of the 20 things which was designate the health of this industry, only 3 of them are not blemished by the disruptive process. So you go from here to here. Just another way to try to convince you that you really need to get engaged in this process and figure out, you know, where you want to be here, and that there's some possibilities. This is not bad news. It's good news. It's an opportunity, but it's an opportunity that you need to take. So let's go back to our central question. That our issue was, are you going to be a competitor or are you going to be a victim? Well, first of all, you're not going to be a victim because there's been too much warning. You know, surprise is a necessary part of being a victim. So you've had a lot of notice over the last 3 years. So if you get on board here and start, you know, going, the issue is, what do you have to do to be a competitor? So we ask you 14 questions. So go back, add them up. If less than 50% of your responses to the above questions were not positive, you're likely to be what we would say a victim. This is a nice way of saying your chances of surviving in the new environment are pretty slim. Okay, so if you don't have any of the plans we've talked about, you kind of know where you are. The second, if between 50 and 65% of your responses are positive, meaning that 50 to 65% of the time, yes, we do have a plan, yes, we are chasing this, then your brokerage it's positive, and your brokerage will probably struggle, but it could survive. But if 70% or more of your responses are positive, you will likely become a certified competitor in this new industry environment. So what does this mean? It's time to sit down and put together plans. We're not talking about how much money you have. What we know is you're not going to do well in the industry moving forward unless you work as a team, unless you collaborate and cooperate within your brokerage and put together plans and agree to follow the plans. So it's time for you to activate your plan. It's time to put it into motion, and it's not time to feel bad about it and how did this happen to us and who is supposed to fix this. You're supposed to fix it. And the way you're going to fix it is by looking at the 14 pieces and working on those pieces, and that's how you'll be successful. One of the points I want to leave you with, when we looked at the 7 industries that had already gone through this, the most remarkable factor is how many participants in those 7 industries, by the way, they were car sales, they were travel people, they were hotel people, they were automobile people. There were 7 different of them. It was astounding how many of those folks never bothered to play, who simply never said, we can do this, we can figure this out. They just ignored it, and the problems of ignoring it are not good. So this is the information you need to have to become a competitor. It's up to you. Please know that the Houston Association of Realtors has spent the last 2 years conducting incredible levels of studies about this stuff. Our leadership understands what has to happen. Our staff is prepared to make things happen. Sessions like this are just another example of all the things we're trying to do to say to you, this is a great opportunity. Take advantage of the opportunity, and please let us know if we can help. Back to your day, and have a good one. Thank you.